So once more, good morning, everybody. It is good for us to be here, and while I greeted certain people at the beginning, I want really to also greet those who are with us with the various means of communication that are available to us. I think especially of the Presentation family abroad, because it was through Presentation College in San Fernando that I came to appreciate how the Presentation spirit binds people together. I remember walking the streets of San Francisco, Market Street in particular, and hearing somebody speak with a Trini accent, looking at him and he looking at me. Where are you from? And we acknowledged that we were both Caribbean persons. And later that day, he called me and he asked whether I could come to his home if he came for me. And he had gathered a group of Presentation boys. They still call themselves boys, although they were all men. And it was a wonderful afternoon in which the spirit of Presentation, with the memories of people like Brother Jerome and Matthew Fahey and so on, really resounded throughout the conversation. Presentation College is more than just a name. It is a legend. It is a memory, yes, but it is a memory that strengthens, that gives purpose, which purpose young men of generations have tried to fulfill. When I understood that this Presentation Brothers College in Grenada was the work of Archbishop Finbar Ryan, I felt a particular closeness, because Archbishop Ryan is the bishop who, when he was already way past 80, one day I was sent to see him, and he looked at me and said, "Young man, what are you going to do with your life?" He had a very powerful voice. And I began to tell him about doing law and economics and coming back to help Eric Williams run Trinidad and Tobago. And he looked at me and he said, "Clyde Harvey, you have to be a priest. You have to be a priest. You hear me?" And I laughed, because that was the last thing I wanted to be. But he didn't say anything else. A few months later, he had retired as Archbishop and gone back to Ireland. I met him a few years later when, as a young student, I went to Ireland and I visited him in Cork. But he was one of those giants of the Caribbean church, Irish by birth, but very much a man of the world, very urbane character. Above everything in his ministry as bishop, education was at the center. He brought the Presentation Brothers to the Caribbean. He brought the sisters, the Holy Faith sisters, to the Caribbean. He supported the work of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Cluny. I remember often going to serve his Mass at the convent in Port of Spain, as well as the work of the Holy Ghost Fathers. So when I make that link between Finbar and Presentation, I also remember that he was a person who once said to me, "Education at secondary level is extremely difficult, but unless you do it well at primary level, secondary level will not succeed." And I think he is so right, and that has influenced a lot of my own thinking about education since coming to Grenada. What do we as Catholic Church and as Catholics bring to this task? What have the Presentation Brothers over the years reminded us? The great Protestant theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer, from his prison cell, wrote, "The church is the church only when it exists for others." His idea of a church that can get over itself, beyond itself, to be truly itself, has been very much at the heart of the mission of the church. Pope Francis put it this way: a church that is not dominating, but helping and serving. A church that must tell people of every calling what it means to live for Christ. Perhaps that living for Christ is what we try to do, but sometimes fail when we open our schools. But what that means for us more than anything else is that we are trying to help our young people to discover the treasure that is within. For Pope Francis, we do that by teaching them the art of encounter, where they learn how to relate to others in ways that are beneficial to themselves. The world today tells the young person, live for yourself. If it feels good, do it. Don't let other people hold you back. We say, let us arm our children with the weapons of dialogue. Let us help our children to fight the good fight by teaching them how to live with one another. Those words are the words of Pope Francis in his encyclical letter, Fratelli Tutti, in which he talks about human solidarity as one of the tasks of today's world. So, my dear brothers and sisters, Catholic education is what the brothers have sought to exemplify more than anything else. And when we celebrate 75 years of PBC, we are celebrating 75 years of Catholic education. And I make no apologies for putting the word Catholic in there, because we are not just about education. We are about education that has a certain tone to it, a certain spice to it, if I might say that. And that spice comes from the fundamental respect for the human person, which is at the heart of all true education, and which is so often betrayed in many educational institutions. We have not always succeeded, but we have certainly done our best in trying to do it. Today, the readings, which I understand were chosen by Brother Barry, invite us to look at education in a particular way. The first reading from the prophet Jeremiah, not Dominic Jeremiah, invites us to understand that God calls us. Now, when we read the prophets, although we read it in a particular sequence, one of the things that we have to understand is that the prophets wrote after the experience. So that for the writer of that book, it was only after having experienced his own life that he could then sit down and write, I chose you even before I gave you life. The Jerusalem Bible says, even before you came to birth. Now that's an interesting little change in this translation. Because before you came to birth, I chose you in the womb. But before you came to life, I chose you even before you were conceived. I selected you to be a prophet to the nations. So it is a call to recognize that all of this that we celebrated here is rooted in a sense of a call, a vocation that every human being ought to be aware of. Today, the church is inviting us to broaden our understanding of that every human being living, and especially every human being who is baptized into Christ Jesus, should have a sense of being called by God. A sense that what you do every day is not just your life, it is your response to God. And I remember getting very excited when, as a young student, my lecturer in moral theology told me, morality is not about just obeying commandments here. Morality is not just simply saying there are 10 commandments and I have obeyed them. If you remember the story of the young man, he tells Jesus, I've kept all these commandments. And Jesus calls him beyond the commandments. But I want to call you before the commandments. Before you even think about what you have to do, you have to understand that you are called by God. That your life is not just a life that you live in Vaikivi. That if you really understand what it is about, you understand that your life is a response a response to what you see God doing for you. And if you are responding with a proper awareness, you are responding with gratitude and generosity. So to each of you here this morning, can you really look back over however long you've lived and understand that this call is yours too? You don't have to hear a voice. Sometimes you do. But where it comes is as things unfold, you begin to see. You begin to see. When Finbar Ryan told me what he told me, I went away laughing. When I got back to school, I told my fellow students, Finbar, the old man crazy, you know. And one of them said to me, well, you know, he dying just now. But he had sowed a seed. You know. And that seed became something fruitful when some years later, in the midst of the revolutionary turmoil in Trinidad, I had an experience that told me, you say you want to serve your country? Look around you. All the guys who had gone to prison, all the guys who had been part of the marching up and down, whom I had marched with them, all of them were dropping off from the struggle. One of them came to see me, and he was talking about how difficult the struggle was, and he wanted to know, how was I saying that I want to be in the seminary and so on? He said, how are you going to live without a woman? I said, well, all I can tell you is that we're being trained for that here. So he went off, and I can share this with you, with the recipe for lime juice, which was supposed to cut your nature. And some months later, he came back. He said to myself and the other guy who was my fellow student, he says, Clyde and Glenn, I think I'm changing my mind, you know. This thing too hard. We continued. He went off, gave up the struggle, took a cushy government job, and got married. But the point was, it was at that moment that I was able to recognize that God was calling me to something more. And how do we so build our schools, our systems, even our families, so that our young people have a sense that they are being called to something more? That especially when they have a sense that something is failing in their lives, do not just sit down and give up. Ask yourself, what am I missing? What is missing? And our schools must be able to point that out. Our young adult organizations must be able to challenge young people to think of the more. And then to make the commitments wherever they are. So that whether you become a lawyer, a doctor, a priest, a nun, whatever, you have a sense that you are not just simply living for yourself. You are responding to the God who calls you. The message of Jeremiah tells us, today I give you authority over nations and kingdoms to uproot and to pull down, to destroy and to overthrow. And that word authority is a very tricky word, because as soon as people think they have authority, they think they must use it to lord it over others. But the word authority in the original Hebrew invites us to understand that it's about growth. It's about increasing. And how do I help other people to grow? How do I help other people to increase? If I am given authority over others, especially by God, it is so that they might increase, that they might grow. Thanks be to God, I meet past students of presentation and of our other Catholic secondary schools, boys and girls, who can say, yes, I owe this to my school, that I have become the person who I am, that I have grown through life to do the things that I'm now able to do. And that is why it takes a certain skill. And this is where teacher training becomes so important. And I thank God that my own experience of both presentation and St. Mary's is one in which those who come to teach are mentored. That's so important. They are mentored. They are taught how to do it. When I began to teach in St. Mary's College, the very first thing before they could even say, yes, you will teach, we had a whole vacation. And if we didn't want to do it, sorry. We had a whole holiday period in which we had to sit with seasoned teachers and understand the work that we were taking upon ourselves. So, brothers and sisters, we thank God for those men and women who have helped young people to grow through their ministry at Presentation College. So, the second reading, one which I smiled when I realized it was the second reading, because the first two verses were the subject of my master's thesis in theology. So I feel very strongly about it. Listen again. I appeal to you, offer yourselves as a living sacrifice to God, dedicated to his service and pleasing to him. This is the true worship that you should offer. Worship is not about simply coming to Mass. Worship is not about jumping up and down and saying, praise Jesus. Worship is about your life, what you are living in your life, what you are offering to God. And when in a few moments I will stand at this altar and offer a chalice and a set of hosts to God, I am not just offering bread and wine, I'm offering you. You should be uniting yourselves with that. You should be uniting yourself with that bread as the work of your hands, the creative stuff that you have done. And boys, whenever you do anything that is a creative expression of yourself, you're painting, you're working in the garden, you're playing an instrument, always, 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 when you feel good about it, remember to offer it to God. And not only when you feel good about it, when you are broken by it, when you sense yourself not able to do it properly, offer it to God then. Because the wine that we offer is grapes crushed. And any human being who is trying to live his or her life to the full will be crushed. You do not come to victory without struggle. And you do not come to authentic victory unless you have failed along the way. You do not reach the goal unless somehow along the way, even as you train, you stumble sometimes. But that is what you come to offer to God. So again, in the context of the vocation, it is not just a vocation to do this or do that. It is a vocation to so shape your life that you can offer it to God. And when Paul writes, do not conform yourselves to the standards of this world, but let God transform you inwardly by a complete change of your mind, he is really holding the view from his own experience, I suspect, that all of us are tempted to be conformed to the standards, listen to the word used, the standards of this world, the norms of this world. And one of the things that ought to be true of the fruits of Presentation College is that you question the standards of the world at every point. You question the standards of the world. We are now in a most difficult period in the current history of our race. People are saying all kinds of things. Some people are very angry at Putin. Some people are saying that Biden should be doing more. But we have to ask ourselves, what is really motivating all of this? I took a lot of licks the other day when I suggested that people needed to listen to Putin a little bit more. Listening to him now is a problem. But if we'd been listening to him all along, we would have heard the pain of the Russian people after the breakup of the Soviet Union. And it is that pain that still drives him. And unless the West addresses that pain, unless the church addresses that pain, we will get nowhere. And Pope Francis, understanding that, went to the Russian embassy. All that happened there is not being told and will not be told. But one writer suggests that it was a gesture just to let Putin know, you do not have to believe that you are all alone. But how do we come to that kind of breadth of vision? Only if we are trained and counseled and helped to see that when you hear one view, when you see one thing happening, check the other side. Check and try to understand what is really going on. When you boys get married and your wife comes to you and she begins to complain, what do you say? What do you do? Don't only think about her, Listen to her well. But also check your reaction in yourself. Because the standards of the world, which you will pick up in the bars and the rooms, the washrooms, after your games, are standards that will tell you, women always like to complain. Don't bother with them. If you ignore them, eventually they won't go away. No, that's the standard of the world. If you really understand what we are being called to in Jesus Christ, we are being called to community, we're being called to relationship, we understand that we're being called to be persons who know how to relate. One of the things that is so important, even in what I say today, is this. The theme says, celebrating our contributions to nation building. Presentation, Brothers College, contributing to nation building. I want to suggest that that's broad. I want to suggest that if Presentation, Brothers College wants to contribute to the nation, it must first contribute to the person. It must take on the task of person building. It must take on the task of making sure that the boys who go through the school are persons. And when you talk about person, you're talking about someone in relationship. And I've said it before to various schools when I've visited them. I really would love to see that all our Catholic schools are not simply about competition, that our Catholic schools are about collaboration, teaching our young people how to work together, how to find their purpose and their best development of self in that collaboration. And in that collaboration, to discover the value of their own lives, but also the value of the lives of those with whom they have to live. And in a world where the whole gender question is very, very much on the table, I would hope that one of the things that our Catholic schools will be able to do is to help our young men and women to really understand what it means to relate as man and woman to one another. That's a whole new ball game. Never in human history have women been known to take a place in the world as they have taken now, except perhaps in those societies which were matricentric and focal. But today, certainly flowing out of the Western experience, women are saying we are human beings in our own right. We are persons in our own right. And we demand of you as men respect for that. And let's begin to discover anew what that means. That means that Presentation College cannot be satisfied with simply training its young men. It must also help them to learn what it means to relate to the girls in the convent and maybe other girls as well. So that when you get to TAMCC, you don't go wild. Right. So this capacity to relate means that the formation that we give you. And here the church prefers the word formation even before education, because we've used it in the past with regard to our priests and nuns, but now we want to begin to use it with regard to all our young people, that we must form them to use power. We must form them to understand the meaning of their lives. We must form them to value their lives, and we must form them to discover their purpose. Pope Francis says something that I really loved. He said, everyone is born as an original, but many people end up dying as photocopies. Hear me again. Everyone is born as an original, but many people end up dying as photocopies. Don't let that happen to you. At this stage of your life, you need to look at others. When I was your age, John F. Kennedy died. And I learned his inaugural address by heart because I wanted to be able to speak the way I had experienced him speaking on that day and moving the whole world. After that, a number of other people became influential. But then one day, as in my 20s, I woke up and I said, to hell with all of that. I must be me, but I must not just be the me that I now know. I must be so open to my life that I allow God to shape me into the person I can become. And I think that was a moment of conversion towards the true direction of my life. And this is what every school must be able to do, especially secondary school, must be able to take the young people who pass through them and so shape them and form them that one day they discover who they really are and who they're called to be. And this is vital, especially for those who will be leaders. I've seen it so often myself. People claim to be leaders. They want to be leaders. They become leaders. But they are so insecure that their leadership fails. Sometimes they themselves don't realize that it's failing, because as far as they are concerned, they are leading. They have authority, the wrong kind of authority. They exercise power. But nothing happens in their life that tells you that through the experience of leadership, they are themselves growing. And every time you challenge them, they go back into their comfortable corner. Our schools must be able to help our young people to discover their truth and begin to follow it. Pope Francis says, we must not rob our youth of hope and joy, or drug them into becoming a slave to the interests of others. If the years of youth are to serve purpose, they must be times of generous commitment, wholehearted dedication, and sacrifices that are difficult but ultimately fruitful. Sacrifices that are difficult but ultimately fruitful. That is what we hope you will be able to offer to God every time you stand at the altar before Him. Finally, the gospel. The gospel talks about you are the light of the world. And I could see Brother Barry saying, yes, that is what he wants Presentation College to be. That is what it is. Light for Grenada. A light that shines on the lampstand. I had intended going down one road with this, but from inside I heard the talk about no matches. And then I came up here and I thought we would have found matches somewhere. But we are celebrating Mass without light, without the candles that ought to be lit on the altar. And I think that is a parable for us, and one that I want to leave with you this morning, boys and young men and men and women. Light. Yes, ever so often when listening to the radio and the cacophony that is on the airwaves these days, I say to myself, who will lead us out of this darkness of political animosity? Who? What we have to understand, light does not come by itself. It only takes a spark, the song says, to get a fire going. We couldn't find one spark here today. I'm both saddened by it, angered by it, but also excited by it. Because the question is, where will the sparks come from to light up the darkness of Grenada? Grenada is not all dark. There's some wonderful lights already. We keep turning to Kirani, James, and so on. There's a lot of light around. But there is a lot of light that is still needed. And this is the work that presentation still has to do. And I want to underline that it is not only the work that is to be done in the school by the teachers. The presentation spirit alive and well in so many men in this country must recognize where the light is needed now. These young men will bring the light later on. One or two of them will be young enough and brave enough to bring light now. Most of them will bring the light later. But there must be sparks to light the candles, or else the candles will remain unlit and the darkness will prevail. My dear brothers and sisters, today is a wonderful day. The rain has ceased, but there's something about the rain when it comes that brings a freshness with it. And it is that freshness that I want us to savor. Because as we go forth from this place, we must not go forth from this place stale. We should go forth from this place with that freshness, with a sense of renewed purpose, with a sense of new vision, with a sense that we must search for those things. I am bishop here 4 years, and I'm still searching for what it will take to help the Catholic Church to become what God calls it to be. If that is true of the church, it is true of the whole country. So I want to thank especially the people who have put themselves at the service of Presentation Brothers College. The brothers are not on the staff anymore. That has its own sadness for me, but it's a fact. We have to live with it. We hope, as the initiatives of Brother Robert bear fruit, that there will be other brothers in the future to join the staff. But for now, we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to the lay people who have taken up the reins of the college and who continue the work of the college in all its depth, in all its beauty, in all its value. And I can never thank them enough in the name of the church for the work that they do. And it is for you boys, and this applies not only to presentation, you boys to think of whether or not God is calling you to be a teacher. Men are running away from teaching because they're not paying enough. That's what I heard the very first time I hit a crisis with schools. That doesn't have to be. I have met men in this country who are teaching, but who are also doing something on the side to increase their income, whether it's farming the garden that they have or not. But they stay teaching because they are committed to it. And God is calling some of you to be the mentors and the models for generations to come, generations yet unborn. May God inspire you to do just that. And may all of you who have come here today continue to pray for the college, continue to pray for the church in education, continue to pray for education in Grenada. Amen.